David, I saw your note. Thanks for the heads up. That was the simple reply I sent after reading the cruel words scrawled in his messy handwriting on the back of our electric bill. My hands trembled as I processed what he had written. Shock, hurt, and anger surged within me, but oddly enough, the emotion that took over the most was calm determination. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. At 36, I never expected to be standing in my kitchen reading a goodbye note from my husband of 12 years. I'm Nina Parker, an entrepreneur who built a successful online business selling handcrafted jewelry, something David always dismissed as my little hobby. Looking back, I should have seen the signs. The late nights, the hushed phone calls, the way he'd quickly close his laptop whenever I walked in. But what David didn't know was that I wasn't as naive as he thought. 6 months ago, I noticed something odd. While paying the bills, I saw large sums of money being transferred out of our joint account into an account I didn't recognize. When I casually mentioned it to David, he brushed it off as investments. That's when I realized I needed to protect myself. I might have played the role of the perfect supportive wife on the outside, but inside, I was preparing for a war. I began documenting everything: the unexplained expenses, the suspicious phone calls, and the nights he claimed to be working late, but the office was dark when I drove by. I opened a separate bank account and started moving my personal savings there. I also consulted Sarah, my best friend, and a divorce attorney. She helped me understand my rights and options. The turning point came when we refinanced the house during our renovation. I made sure it was solely in my name, something David, too preoccupied with his investments, didn't notice. Standing in the kitchen now, reading his note, I couldn't help but feel a slight smile tugging at my lips. David had always underestimated me. He probably thought this note would destroy me, leave me broken and begging for him to come back. Instead, I felt liberated. The pretense was over. I breathed deeply, smoothed down my blouse, and pulled out my laptop. It was time to take action. David wanted to play hardball? Fine. But he was about to learn I'd been training for this game far longer than he realized. The signs of David's deception had started small. Last Christmas, he gave me a silver bracelet that seemed expensive, but I recognized it as a cheap knockoff. I had worked with fine jewelry for years. When I confronted him, he turned it around on me, accusing me of being materialistic and ungrateful. That was his usual tactic, making me doubt myself, twisting everything to make me look unreasonable. Our marriage wasn't always like this. In the early years, David supported my dreams. He helped me set up my first online store and celebrated when I made my first big sale. But as my business grew, something changed in him. Maybe it was pride or jealousy, but he started making snide comments about my little online shop at dinner parties, acting like I was just pretending to be a businesswoman while he did real work at his accounting firm. I remember the day I landed a contract with a major department store chain. Instead of celebrating, David barely looked up from his phone and muttered, "That's nice, honey." I cried myself to sleep that night, but not from sadness. Anger, at myself for letting him diminish my achievements. The real wake-up call came 3 months ago when I had coffee with my sister Janet. She worked at the bank David used for his business accounts. Hesitant, she told me she'd seen some concerning things: large withdrawals, suspicious transfers. "You need to protect yourself," she said. That conversation changed everything. I started paying attention to details I had ignored before. David always insisted on handling our finances, despite my background in business. There were the mysterious weekend trips he couldn't explain, and the whispered phone conversations that ended when I walked into the room. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't wanted to see. I reached out to Sarah, and she listened carefully before giving me a hard look. You're smart, successful, and stronger than you think. Stop playing the role assigned to you. Start playing chess, not checkers. And that's exactly what I did. While David thought I was busy with my little hobby, I documented every suspicious transaction, every unexplained absence, every lie. I kept my plans quiet, maintained my routine, and played the part of the trusting wife, while secretly preparing for the storm I knew was coming. The day after finding David's note, I received an email from our real estate agent, Marcus. The subject line read, "Urgent house sale documentation required." My heart skipped a beat when I opened it. David had indeed tried to list our house for sale, but there was a problem. He couldn't proceed without my signature, thanks to the refinancing papers that had put the house solely in my name. I remembered the day clearly. David had been too busy to attend the meeting with the bank, casually telling me to handle it. He'd signed a power of attorney without even reading it, assuming I would do what I always did, take care of the details while he made the big decisions. His carelessness had just become his biggest mistake. I called Marcus immediately. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding," I said calmly. "I haven't authorized any sale of the property." There was an awkward pause. Then Marcus explained that David had been insistent about listing the house immediately. I could hear the discomfort in his voice as he described David's arrogant assumption that everything was already handled. Just then, my phone buzzed with a text from David. "Call the real estate agent. Sign the papers when they come. I'll give you 24 hours to pack your things." The contempt in his message made my blood boil, but I stayed composed. This was the moment I had prepared for. I dialed Sarah. "It's time," I said. She understood immediately. We had been preparing for this day for months. Sarah had already drafted the divorce papers, anticipating David's move. Unlike his plans, ours were legally sound and airtight. "Remember," Sarah said, "don't respond to any more of his messages. Let him think he's in control. We'll hit him with everything at once. The protected house deed, the documented fund transfers, everything." Her confidence solidified my resolve. This wasn't just about protecting my assets anymore. It was about standing up for myself after years of manipulation. I sat at my desk, staring at a framed photo of David and me from happier times. The smiling woman in that picture seemed like a stranger now. I took the frame down and placed it in a drawer. It was time to decide what came next, and for the first time in our marriage, I was the one holding all the cards. The next morning, I received a barrage of increasingly angry texts from David. "Why isn't the house listed yet? Marcus says there's a problem with the paperwork. Stop playing games and sign the documents." Each message revealed his growing frustration as his plans began to unravel. I was in my office finalizing jewelry orders when the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was David, his face flushed with anger. This was the first time I had seen him since the note, and to my surprise, I felt only calm determination. "What did you do?" he demanded, pushing past me into the foyer. "Marcus says I can't sell the house without your signature. But that's impossible. I handle all our finances." I crossed my arms, standing my ground. "Did you? Like you handled my business accounts? The ones you've been secretly transferring money from?" His face paled slightly before he recovered. "What are you talking about? I made a few investments for our future. You wouldn't understand. You just play with beads all day." I walked over to my desk and pulled out a thick folder. "Actually, I understand perfectly. I understand that you've been siphoning money from our joint accounts. I understand that you tried to sell a house that's only in my name. And I understand that you thought I was too stupid to notice any of it. David's expression shifted from anger to confusion, then fear. What do you mean? The house is only in your name. Remember that refinancing paperwork you were too busy to read? The renovation meeting you couldn't be bothered to attend? I watched as realization dawned on his face. You signed over your rights to the house, David. It's mine. Just like the business you thought was just a hobby, the one that's now worth more than your annual salary. David slumped onto the couch, his earlier confidence deflating. You can't do this to me, he muttered, but his voice had lost its bite. I've already made arrangements. I have plans. Plans that need my money, my house, and my compliance. I didn't let him finish. Here's what's really going to happen. You're going to leave my house. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings and those funds you transferred. We'll be discussing those too. David tried to regain his composure, straightening his tie as he stood. You're bluffing, he said, though the uncertainty in his voice was unmistakable. I walked over to my desk and pulled out a folder. You mean, like these bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts? I laid document after document in front of him. Or these emails you accidentally left open on our shared iPad discussing your plans to leave? Or maybe you'd like to see the private investigator's report about your business trips to Vegas. His face went even paler with each revelation. You hired a private investigator, he asked, panic creeping into his voice. No, I answered calmly. Sarah did. Remember Sarah? My coffee friend who you never took seriously. The one who's also one of the best divorce attorneys in the state? David started pacing, running his hands through his hair. This isn't how it was supposed to go, he muttered. Was it supposed to go any other way? I asked. You wanted me to break down, beg you to stay, and accept whatever scraps you decided to leave me with. I shook my head. That's not happening. I've already frozen our joint accounts legally. Since I have documentation of your unauthorized withdrawals, the house isn't going anywhere. And as for my business, that was never yours to take. David's phone buzzed, and when he glanced at it, the color drained from his face. Your lawyer? He asked weakly. Yes, I replied. She's already filing for divorce, and she's also requesting an emergency hearing regarding the funds you transferred. We have records of everything, David. Every transaction, every email, every lie. He sank back onto the couch, looking defeated. I didn't think you'd fight back, he admitted. You never thought I would, I said, my voice steady. You were so busy underestimating me that you never noticed I'd stopped underestimating myself. The doorbell rang again, right on schedule. David looked up, panic flooding his face as he realized how thoroughly he'd been outmaneuvered. You should leave now, I said firmly. Any further communication can go through our lawyers. I opened the front door to find Sarah standing there, her professional smile in place, a briefcase full of additional documents in hand. As David walked past her, he looked like a shadow of the man who had left that cruel note on my kitchen counter. No, please. He tried one last time. We can talk about this. Like you talked to me about selling our house, I asked, my voice laced with quiet strength. Or about draining our accounts. Sarah placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, reminding me to stay calm and focused. David's phone started ringing again. It was his bank. Sarah had warned me this would happen the moment our divorce petition was filed. It triggered an investigation into the suspicious transfers. I watched him answer the call, his face growing more distressed by the second. What do you mean, frozen? He stammered into the phone. No, you don't understand. I need access to those accounts. He looked at me, desperation in his eyes, finally realizing the full extent of his plans unraveling. Sarah stepped forward, her voice professional but firm. Mr. Parker, I suggest you contact your own attorney. We have substantial evidence of financial misconduct, and the court takes these matters very seriously. David's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto the front steps, the weight of his actions crashing down on him. Tears began streaming down his face, but not tears of remorse, tears of frustration and defeat. Everything he had planned, every scheme he had meticulously laid out, was crumbling around him. I never thought, he began. That's right, I interrupted. You never thought. You never thought I'd stand up for myself. You never thought I'd be smart enough to protect myself. You never thought I'd be strong enough to walk away. That's why you left a note instead of having a real conversation. You never really knew me at all. As we watched him slowly walk to his car, Sarah squeezed my hand. You did good, she said. No, really good. She had been more than just my lawyer throughout this. She'd been my rock, helping me find strength I didn't even know I had. As David's car disappeared around the corner, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. The pretense was over. No more checking bank statements in secret. No more documenting his lies. No more playing the role of the docile wife. I was free. In the weeks that followed, I focused on rebuilding my life. My jewelry business, which David had so casually dismissed for years, became my sanctuary. Orders were pouring in, and I was finally free to expand without hearing snide comments about wasting money on new equipment or materials. Sarah kept me updated on the legal proceedings. David had hired an aggressive attorney, but it didn't matter. We had documented everything meticulously. The judge was particularly interested in the paper trail of his financial misconduct. Those business investments he'd been making turned out to be nothing more than gambling losses in Vegas and attempts to hide money in accounts I wasn't supposed to find. The house, my beautiful craftsman-style home, the one I had lovingly renovated, remained mine. I redecorated slowly, erasing every trace of David. I painted the living room in a deep blue he'd always vetoed, turned his office into my jewelry studio, and finally bought that antique workbench I had been eyeing for years. Each change felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. My sister Janet came over often, helping me sort through years of accumulated memories. Remember how he used to mock your little hobby at family gatherings? She asked one evening as we looked through old photos. Now look at you. You're featured in 3 major magazines, and he's living in a 1-bedroom apartment. She was right. The business was thriving now that I could focus on it fully. I had hired 2 assistants, and a major department store had just picked up my latest collection. The irony wasn't lost on me. Everything David had belittled was now sustaining me, while his so-called smart investments had left him nearly bankrupt. My friends rallied around me in ways I never expected. Sarah, beyond being my attorney, spent countless evenings with me, helping me process everything. You're not just surviving, she told me one night over wine. You're thriving. I smiled at the irony. My little hobby was now earning me respect from the very people who had once dismissed it. The hardest part of all this wasn't the legal battles, or even the loneliness. It was confronting how much of myself I had buried to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. I had dimmed my light, shrunk my dreams, and doubted my instincts. But no longer. I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror as I walked into a ballroom, wearing jewelry from my latest collection. The woman I saw in that reflection was unrecognizable. Gone was the hesitant woman who used to check with her husband before making any decision. In her place stood someone confident, someone who knew her worth. During the evening, I ran into several couples who used to be our friends. Most had heard about the divorce through the grapevine, and their reactions were telling. The wives, in particular, were different. One man, who had always dismissed my work, now looked at my pieces with genuine interest. He asked intelligent questions about my techniques, never once calling my work cute or a hobby. It wasn't romance, at least not yet, but it was a reminder that there were people who could see me for who I really was. David tried to contact me a few times, especially after the court ordered him to repay the money he'd taken from our joint accounts. His messages swung between anger and pleading. He had underestimated me in every way possible. The house David had tried to sell out from under me became a true sanctuary. I hosted monthly gatherings for local female entrepreneurs, turning my restored dining room into a place where women could share their challenges and celebrate their successes. The room that once echoed with David's dismissive comments now rang with laughter and encouragement. Looking back, I realized just how far I had come. My jewelry business, the little hobby David had scorned, now employed 8 people and had a waiting list for custom pieces. But more than the business success, I was proud of the woman I had become. The other day, I found that note from David, tucked away in a drawer. Reading those angry words, "I'm done with you and your boring life," I couldn't help but laugh out loud. My life is anything but boring now. I'm traveling to artisan fairs across the country, teaching women to create and building a future I never dreamed possible. If I hadn't prepared for the storm, if I hadn't trusted my instincts and documented everything, David's note could have devastated me. Instead, it liberated me. Last week, I received a letter from David's sister. She said he was still struggling to rebuild his life. She mentioned how he finally admitted to her that he regretted underestimating me, and how his arrogance had cost him everything. Part of me hopes he's learned something from all of this, but deep down, I know I showed him that strength comes from within. I showed her the simple silver ring I created for myself after the divorce was finalized. Engraved inside are the words, "Trust your strength." That's what this journey has taught me. We are all stronger than we know. Sometimes, it just takes a cruel note on a kitchen counter to help us discover it.